case, there is a certain kind of an Arab peace plan, if I could use the correct terminology. Ehud Olmert, the previous Prime Minister of Israel, and Nasser al-Qidwa, who is the nephew of Yasser Arafat, they came up with a plan describing the ingredients of a long-term sustainable Israeli-Palestinian peace. Do you think this particular peace plan did not get a lot of traction in the media?
There has not been a serious peace plan for Israel-Palestine for the past, certainly the two administrations. Under Trump, nothing was presented except the Abraham Accords, which have nothing to do with Palestine. And the Biden administration didn't present anything until October 7th started.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. This is Middle East Insights platform. This is really very good morning to all of us. And today we are going to talk about the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. And for that, we have none other than Dr. Nabeel Khoury with us, who, between academia and the US State Department, has devoted his working life to examine the US role in the Middle East and to follow the cultural, political developments taking place across North Africa and Middle East. Dr. Khoury earned his BA in Political Science from American University in Beirut, his MA and PhD from Political Science from the State University of New York at Albany. His life in academia included a 3-year stint teaching at the University of Jordan in Amman, following 4 years as Assistant Professor of Political Science at College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. Dr. Khoury has published articles on leadership and development in the Arab world in the Middle East Journal, Journal of South Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, International Journal of Middle East Studies. His most recent scholarly articles are on the regional impact of the Arab uprising and the US policy in Yemen. In 1987, Dr. Khoury left academia to join the US State Department. Among his overseas posts were Consul General in Morocco, 1998 to 2002. In the Iraq War, Dr. Khoury served as a State Department spokesperson at US Central Command in Doha and in Baghdad in 2003. From Baghdad, he went to Yemen as Deputy Chief of Mission at the US Embassy in Sana'a, 2004 to 2007. As the Director of the Near East South Asia Office of the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research from 2008 to 12, Dr. Khoury followed the Arab uprising and participated in high-level meetings and briefings on the turmoil that preceded and followed those historic events. Following his retirement from the state, Dr. Khoury was a senior fellow at Chicago Council for Global Affairs in 2013, authoring the Middle East Corner website for the Council and lecturing at Northwestern University with a focus on US national security and policy in the Middle East. I'm going to stop here, because if we continue, this is going to take one entire year. 1 year or more.
Listen, thank you very much for the introduction. Working with the Arab Center in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
I post most of my articles and columns with them.
So thank you so much, sir. Shukran Habibi for coming here. And Sabah al-Khair to you. No, Masa al-Khair to you.
Masa al-Khair, yes. It's evening here. Your good morning. Yeah.
Yes. So let us start, sir, with the first development actually that has taken place yesterday. And this is very, very interesting because I was a bit gobsmacked when I came to know about it. So, Saudi Arabia specifically has encouraged Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to name a temporary successor or deputy who would take over from him in the event of a power vacuum. By doing so, President Abbas has addressed concerns of a possible power vacuum following his departure. He's 89 years of age. In a decree, the president, Mahmoud Abbas, said that if the position of the president of national security or authority becomes vacant in the absence of the legislative council, the Palestinian National Council president shall assume the duties temporarily. He has not named a deputy. The current chairman of the Palestinians' top decision-making body is 75-year-old Ravi Fatou. Fatou also served as a stopgap leader following the death of Yasser Arafat in 2004. President Abbas is saying that the elections might happen in the next 90 days. Though his entire concern of East Jerusalem being not included in 2021, that still remains open. But my first question to you is that let's talk about the Palestinian Authority and in your perspective, because Mahmoud Abbas also went to G7 for having a conversation with the G7 leaders regarding the ceasefire. Do you think that Palestinian Authority has been able to navigate the challenges after October 7 properly?
They haven't been able to navigate anything properly, not just since October 7, but for years. Mahmoud Abbas has been a very ineffective leader, and the Palestinian Authority manages things on the West Bank mainly. But frankly, the authority is full of corruption. And what happened is that when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, pushed the PLO out of Lebanon, they went to Tunisia. They then worked on weakening the PLO. And as a result, we had Hamas come up and become strong, particularly in Gaza. But the authority eventually under Mahmoud Abbas was very cooperative, working with the Israelis, working with the US. So they essentially helped the Israelis monitor Palestinian opposition in the West Bank. They do not have a good reputation in the region. And even though they have been so passive and so cooperative with the Israelis, Netanyahu said he doesn't want them to take over Gaza. So they don't even have the confidence of the Israeli government, with which they've been very cooperative.
So that exactly is true, sir. So in that case, there is a certain kind of an Arab peace plan, if I could use the correct terminology. Ehud Olmert, the previous Prime Minister of Israel, and Nasser al-Qidwa, who is the nephew of Yasser Arafat, they came up with a plan describing the ingredients of a long-term sustainable Israeli-Palestinian peace. And how, the joint plan is to restore peace in the region, including transfer of West Bank territories to Israel and vice versa. Do you think this particular peace plan did not get a lot of traction in the media?
There has not been a serious peace plan for Israel-Palestine for the past, certainly the two administrations. Under Trump, nothing was presented except the Abraham Accords, which have nothing to do with Palestine. And the Biden administration didn't present anything until October 7th started, and then they tried to rush something through. Under the Obama administration, there were a couple of attempts, but they didn't work, and then Obama gave up. So really, you have to go all the way back to the presidency of William Clinton and the assassinated Prime Minister Rabin
Nabeel.
who forged together a serious peace plan. Since that time, there has not been a serious peace plan. Um, Personally, I gave up realistically on seeing a real peace between Israel and Palestine and the emergence of a Palestinian state. I gave up almost 20 years ago, analytically speaking. I think right now it is virtually impossible for a Palestinian state to arise, and therefore impossible to have real Israeli-Palestinian peace.
Yes, that
My
is.
humble opinion.
No, no, that is, it's much more of a realistic opinion actually, instead of being bought by the facade of negotiations happening here and there, which do hit the news line but do not really work out. For example, the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire. When
Yeah.
it is, there are still, the moment Biden spoke, which was around 2:30 in the morning IST. Biden is speaking from the Rose Garden, and then within 3 minutes, Israel is bombarding Beirut, south of Beirut. And it continued till 4 a.m. of the Beirut morning time. And even after the ceasefire was accepted, when a lot of Lebanese started going back to their villages, there was massive firing, and there were crimes that were again committed. There were IDF soldiers who were not allowing a lot of Lebanese civilians to come back to their village. At the same time, yesterday was a very, very bloody day in Beit Lahia in northern Gaza. And like, for example, Dr. Ahmed Al-Galut, who is the head of the intensive care unit at Kamal Adwan Hospital, he was deliberately killed by the Israeli drone when he was heading towards the hospital. The city of Beit Lahia, once which was a refuge for the displaced, has become a massive grave site. And at the same time, like the ceasefire is actually not holding tight between Israel and Lebanon.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said on the Lebanon ceasefire. First of all, a ceasefire, even if it proves to be temporary, is a very good thing on a humanitarian level right now. There are roughly 1 million displaced Lebanese who need to breathe, need to move back to their villages to inspect how much damage their homes have suffered, to bury their dead. So on a humanitarian level, there's a big need for a ceasefire, even if it's not perfect at this point. I think it's too early to judge how well the ceasefire will be respected by all sides. So this is to begin with. But then there are problems with the ceasefire, of course. Amos Hochstein is a very clever diplomat, and he was able to get the maritime borders between Lebanon and Israel sorted out a couple of years ago. But Amos Hochstein is, first of all, a dual national Israeli-American. In the end of the day, he is going to lean in favor of Israel. He has to. So the problem with the ceasefire, there are many problems, but on a technical level, first of all, there is a monitoring mechanism to monitor any violations. That mechanism is not very clear. It's not spelled out who exactly will be involved. Supposedly French and American generals will somehow supervise the process. The Lebanese army is supposed to also supervise. But then the consequences, what happens when there is a violation? What sanction is imposed on the violator? That's not clear. They have a provision in the agreement, number 4, I think, that says mutual right to respond.
Yes.
Now, that's a misnomer. I mean, the mutuality was thrown in to appease the Lebanese because primarily it was Israel having the right to move anywhere in Lebanon to respond to violations. The Lebanese objected, so they said, oh, okay, Lebanese too. But in reality, Israel can respond. All they have to do is put a few of their jet fighters in the air and bomb whatever they want in Lebanon. Hezbollah cannot respond while it is being dismantled. In other words, they're asking Hezbollah to disarm. And at the same time, it will have the right to respond. Well, if it really disarms, then what will it respond with? And if it's up to the Lebanese army to respond to violations by Israel, there's first the technical question of capacity. The Lebanese army is small, not trained enough, doesn't have the heavy weaponry to respond to Israel. But more importantly, the Lebanese army is not authorized. It doesn't have the Lebanese political decision to properly defend the borders of Lebanon. This goes back, way back to the Lebanese National Pact. The Lebanese army has never engaged the Israelis, all since 1948. And so the question is really for Lebanon. I mean, you need all the Lebanese factions to get together to have a national dialogue, to improve their unity and to put together a strategic defense agreement. They have to agree which borders to defend and how to defend them.
Yeah.
If they all agree and authorize the Lebanese army to truly defend any incursions by Israel, then you have the technical question of properly equipping and training, and that can be arranged. But the most important thing is they are not as of yet authorized to defend the southern border of Lebanon.
Yeah, and there are also like Lebanese army men were also killed recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Occasionally the Lebanese army suffers either by mistake or is in the middle of a fight or is somewhere the Israelis don't want them to be. And they do suffer some casualties, and that's happened over the years. This time wasn't the first time. But even when that happens, they don't respond. They don't.
Yeah, that is also even though like Lebanese army supposedly is like America, US can maneuver the Lebanese army, but they are also UNIFIL forces from 50 different countries. And like
Yeah.
to India, there are 900 troops in, between the Litani River and the blue border.
The UNIFIL is an interesting story. It represents the weakness of international law and the weakness of the United Nations. They're there to count the blows, not really to do anything about them. In other words, when skirmishes start, they say, okay, this one fired first, or this one fired how many missiles. They have a ledger, and they report back that this is what we saw. But they don't have the force, they don't have the authority to respond to any use of force, including when they are subjected to fire. They were fired on by the Israelis a
Yeah,
couple of times.
yes, and it was a massive, it went viral on social media for a while and then it died down.
But they don't respond. They
Yeah,
are a peacekeeping force. They are not a fighting force.
yeah. And so, sir, coming back to Gaza, when Biden suddenly, when he spoke in his speech, but before we do that, my colleague is asking, Abu Zafar, he's asking that why did Hezbollah agree to have a ceasefire without a ceasefire in Gaza? Though Hezbollah did not actually agree, it was Nabi Berri negotiating on behalf of Hezbollah.
Well, I
Nabi
mean,
Berri.
Nabeel Khoury has been speaking for Hezbollah for quite a while now. So even though this happened even during the maritime borders question, everybody knew that the real Lebanese negotiator was Hezbollah, but they were not directly involved. The Lebanese government and Nabih Berri were speaking for them. So what Nabih Berri accepts is really something that Hezbollah has already allowed him to accept. That's number one. Number two, I think this afternoon or this morning, Sheikh Naim Qasim, the new Secretary General, he made another speech. And basically, he thanked Nabih Berri and he accepted the agreement outright. So now Hezbollah is on the record with their own words accepting the agreement. This is the most serious gain by Israel in this war between them and Hezbollah, is that they were able to separate the two issues. Hezbollah, when Hassan Nasrallah was still alive, he insisted that they would only accept a ceasefire if Israelis stopped bombing Gaza. But now that he's dead, you have a new leader. Hezbollah has been on the receiving end of some serious blows. So they want the ceasefire and they accepted to decouple it from the situation in Gaza.
No, that is a dehyphenated approach is something which a lot of states are also following currently. And for example, yesterday, November 29th, was the International Day for Recognition or Solidarity with Palestine. And
Right.
a lot of countries are dehyphenating their bilateral ties with Israel and their bilateral ties with Palestine, example, India. And my question now is that when Joe Biden was giving the speech and he was 45 minutes late, he talked about that Hamas should take a clue from this. Like Hamas should take, the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. Hamas should take a clue from this and come forward. And Hamas has been obstructing any kind of ceasefire talks. And he also said that Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar will be now pulled over to have the negotiations. There was a high-level Egyptian delegation that went to Tel Aviv also recently. So my question is that why suddenly did he pick out, like, what is the entire geopolitics of picking out Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar?
So first of all, my former colleagues at the State Department don't like it when I disrespect the President of the United States. But I have been very underimpressed by the Biden administration and by President Biden personally. He has been actively supporting genocide in Gaza for the past 13, going on 14 months now. And the northern part of Gaza has been pulverized. Hamas, to the extent that it still exists militarily, exists in certain places in the south, in tunnels. They are not the fighting force they were when this conflict began. And if Biden is serious, I don't know how much he's aware of the implications of what he says these days. But if he is serious, it's not Hamas that needs to be told to have a ceasefire. It's Israel. And of course, if he thinks of reprimanding the Israelis, it's usually a very gentle rap on the knuckles. But let's be honest and realistic. He is not serious. There has been no pressure on Israel. If Israel decided to stop, I'm sure Hamas would say, yes, fine. I mean, they are in no position to threaten Israel right now. So, I mean, telling them to have a ceasefire is kind of misdirecting the attention somewhere else other than Israel. That's number one. Number two, mediation efforts, I mean, Qatar in particular has always played a very important mediation role in Middle East conflicts in general. And in this one in particular, Saudi Arabia, which is the big guy on the block in the Arabian Peninsula, has not really shown much interest in mediating. Turkey has volunteered, has offered, but I wouldn't take it very seriously. I would say Qatar and Egypt are the ones that can most effectively mediate, but they have been mediating for the past year, 12 months, and it led nowhere. And that's primarily because they can put their weight, use their influence with Hamas, but they have no influence over Israel, none whatsoever. That's up to the United States. The only country that can influence Israel is the US, but it hasn't even tried.
That is quite true. But what exactly is happening in Syria then right now? Because yesterday there were so many, it's
Uh,
like a razzmatazz of everything happening, going wrong at the same time. So
yeah.
Bashar al-Assad is saying that all the terrorism is being manufactured in Turkey. ISIS is attacking, and all the jihadi forces are attacking Syria. Aleppo is under, some kind of, what I can figure out, some kind of siege. Turkey hasn't said anything so far. Uh,
Well, so the way to look at this is you go back to basics. The problem with a lot of these peace efforts is that they start with the immediate and they don't go back to the crux of the problem, what started it all. And that is the Palestine problem. And over the years, it has been quite evident that what happens in Palestine does not stay in Palestine. It spills over into the region. And Lebanon is the most prominent example of that spillover effect. The Lebanese early on, going back to 48, the creation of Israel, they wanted to try to somehow be neutral, somehow stay out of Arab-Israeli conflicts. But they cannot. They're right there on the border, and Palestinian refugees usually spill over into Lebanon. And to the extent that they cannot move freely under Israeli control, they organize outside, which is Lebanon, Jordan, Syria. And when they do that, the Israelis go strike these countries. And the whole thing keeps happening over and over again. When the Gaza thing started, again, you don't go back to like Yemen jumped into the fray, and Yemen said, I want to support the Palestinians. So they chose to bomb ships in the Red Sea. And therefore, the US and the UK started bombing the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen, instead of saying, okay, the reason they're doing this is Gaza. So let's solve Gaza. Let's solve the Palestine problem. Then all these complications won't be happening. The thing is that it's kind of like a plastic glove, if you fill it with water, and the water goes into all 5 fingers. But if you squeeze one of them, the water goes up and then goes into the other side. What is happening now in Syria is exactly that. What the consequence is, it's a consequence of what just happened in Lebanon. The weakening of Hezbollah and the weakening of Iranian support for Syria means that the opposition to the Assad regime feels empowered, feels the opportunity. Because the Assad regime has been, for the last 10, 12 years or more, propped up by Hezbollah on the ground. Hezbollah provided very significant support for them, and by Iran, and to some extent by Russia. So Russia is now preoccupied in Ukraine. Iran is weakened and is worried about being attacked inside Iran. Hezbollah, all it can do, much of its leadership has been decimated. So they're not in a position to prop up Assad anymore. And therefore, the opposition fills the vacuum and tries to, where they are right now, Aleppo is in a straight line from Aleppo to Homs, straight down to Damascus.
Yeah.
And if they control that road, they can go all the way down to Damascus. Now, again, history keeps repeating itself because people just don't learn the lessons. To some extent, the U.S. and Israel may be happy that Assad is losing power, and primarily because they were supportive of weakening Iran and Hezbollah. The forces, the Syrian opposition has many different forces.
Yes.
But the main one that is involved in the Aleppo deal is the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Authority for Liberation of Damascus. This is a coalition of Islamists, hardline Islamists in Syria. And note this, they are overwhelmingly Sunni Muslims, whereas Iran and Hezbollah are Shia. So this may look on the surface like it's a good thing for Israel, for the US, even for Saudi Arabia, which in the past supported the Sunnis over the Shia. But it goes back to the mistake committed by the US and Saudi Arabia. When the Soviets controlled Afghanistan, they encouraged what was called the Mujahideen at the time, which were Sunni fundamentalist Islamists. They encouraged them, they funded them to fight the Soviets. And after 8 year struggle, the Soviets got tired, they left Afghanistan, but lo and behold, the Islamists became strong. Al-Qaeda was part of that coalition, and Al-Qaeda became ambitious and attacked New York City.
Yeah.
So then years are spent fighting Al-Qaeda and its allies. So now what you're doing is, again, going back to Sunni fundamentalist forces, if not consciously, what you're doing as a consequence of what you're doing in Lebanon, you are empowering them.
Yeah.
And if they take over Damascus, then you're going to have a different problem on your hands.
Yeah, and something which a lot of analysts don't speak about is that Syria is also under occupation. It is under occupation by US. It is under occupation by the Turkish occupation. It is under occupation by Israel also, little quarters of it. But something which I never found the answer of is that why does ISIS not attack Israel?
Well,
Not that I want them to attack Israel, but I'm just trying to understand why.
They attack them. They attack them verbally. They attack them with rhetoric. But they have prioritized for themselves. And ISIS and Al Qaeda are the only genuinely terrorist organization. And I don't agree with all the designations of Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. Those are national-based forces fighting for the liberation of their countries or Palestine. Al-Qaeda moves all over the place. It doesn't have a national base. And all it believes in is violence, but they prioritize violence over Arab regimes. They want to revolutionize and Islamize the Arab countries first. And according to their logic, at the end of that process, inshallah, whenever it happens, then they can attack Israel. Well, I mean, but
that's the logic.
That's the logic. It's very poor logic, but that's the logic there.
It makes no sense of how, because there are a lot of, investigations which are showing that specifically that how ISIS is working with Israel.
I wouldn't go that far. I don't think they're working with Israel, but indirectly, they have been, like I said, you go back to Afghanistan and the Soviet control, they have benefited from American and Saudi support for Muslim fundamentalists who were against communism and were against the Soviet Union. And so as a derivative of that, ISIS benefited from that situation. And I think it's about to benefit again, because ISIS was weakened certainly over the past 10 years. but they did not vanish. And if the Islamists of Idlib now take over Aleppo and move south, then ISIS is going to be strengthened, and we're going to start hearing about them again.
Yeah, that's actually true because right now the Indian media has not caught up with what is happening in Syria. Slowly we will. But my next question is with our member Anurag Kond. He's asking, and the question is basically that do you think that Hezbollah and Hamas, after the setbacks, because there has been massive dismantling of their top leaderships, do you think that they, despite it, they will, over the period of time, they will get stronger. They will have fighters with the fingers on the trigger and will build back their base from the ground, both Hezbollah and Hamas?
Well, I think Hamas will not disappear. They will not vanish. They will still be there, primarily because even if they have been severely weakened in Gaza, they and their supporters are outside of Gaza. They're in the West Bank, they're in Egypt, they're in Qatar. The organization of Hamas is a broad-based one. I think that is very hard to destroy. And so they may lay low militarily for a while, but they will be a factor again at some point. Now, for Hezbollah, it's much more likely. Hezbollah has always been a bigger, stronger organization than Hamas. And Hezbollah is much more difficult to destroy than Hamas. And so the question for Hezbollah is not so much will they come back, it's a question of in what form will they come back? So there is a big challenge for Lebanon, as I mentioned, national unity, a common strategy. There's always been the idea tossed around since the Israelis left Lebanon. There was an 18-year occupation of South Lebanon. When they left Lebanon in 2000, exhausted by having to defend every day against attacks from Hezbollah and other resistance movements in Lebanon. When they left, the question for Hezbollah was, okay, you've liberated Lebanon. Would you now accept some role as to be just a political party and not a military organization anymore? But what do you do with all these fighters well equipped and trained and you just tell them to go home? The question was floated that they could be absorbed into the Lebanese army. And then the Lebanese army would be strengthened. And if there is political national unity, then they would be authorized to properly defend the country against Israel or anybody else. And Hezbollah would just be part of the state rather than to be separate from the state. So that idea was floated but dismissed for lots of reasons over the past decade, I would say. So now the idea comes back.
Yep.
This time it has more of a chance of success if everybody is wise enough and patient enough with each other to accept one another, to accept that really nobody should call the other a traitor, that they're all Lebanese. So the right-wing Lebanese were very hostile against the idea of Hezbollah dragging them into a war with Israel, which they didn't want. They don't want Hezbollah to carry arms and to make military decisions outside of the state. So fine. But the reason Hezbollah did it is originally, again, you go back, they did it because the Lebanese army did not do it. I mean, you go back to starting in 1968, I still remember, when the Israelis attacked Beirut International Airport in 1968, and they blew up 13 airlines, civilian aircraft on the tarmac of Beirut International Airport. Lebanese army did not fire a single shot against them. And that was before the existence of Hezbollah. Hezbollah did not exist. In 82, when Israel invaded, Hezbollah did not exist. It started because of that
Yes.
invasion. So, you have to give them something. Okay, you can criticize them, but you have to give them that they stood up when nobody else in Lebanon did.
Yeah.
And so, for the right wing in Lebanon, I have lots of friends and extended family members who are part of that. And I say to them, if you don't want Hezbollah to use force, the burden is upon you to tell us all what is your alternative. What do you do about protecting Lebanon, first and foremost? And do you authorize the Lebanese army to intervene? And secondly, what do you do about Palestine? You cannot just say, it's not doesn't concern me. You cannot say that. I mean, the Lebanese, the Palestinians, the Syrians, as people, forget the governments and the parties. As people, they are the same people. You cannot watch what's happening in Gaza as a human being. You cannot just watch it. And if you don't want to fight, then please tell me how else can you put any pressure on Israel to stop massacring the Palestinians?
Now, that is even in the Israeli civil society. For example, the Israeli journalist Gideon Levy and the Haaretz newspaper, they have come under sanctions by the Netanyahu government.
Right.
And
Right.
they're not given the freedom or the space to talk about what is happening on the other side. And we have started consuming what is happening in Gaza because it's so much bombarded to us as if it's okay to live with a genocide.
Yeah, you cannot. You cannot.
It's
And I mean, if there are some Lebanese, and I know, I mean, Lebanon is always divided, and people have different points of view. There are some Lebanese who genuinely don't care. Right? They say, "Oh, Palestinians, we don't care. It's not us." But I think the majority of people in Lebanon feel that these are their brothers. And what do you do about that? You cannot just ignore that sentiment. You have to allow. I mean, I told a friend of mine one time who was of that point of view of, it doesn't concern me. I said, if you live in an apartment building and you hear next door your neighbors, the husband comes home every night drunk and starts violently beating his wife and his kids, screams, maybe he's killing them. Do you say, oh, well, it's in the other apartment, I don't care? You cannot. I mean, it's near you, it affects you as a human being. And that is something that the right-wing Lebanese need to get into their heads, that you can defend Lebanon, and that's first and foremost. But secondly, you need, as Lebanon, bordering on Palestine, you need to have another plan. If you can do it diplomatically, fine, through good words, sermons, coalitions, but be creative, but don't just criticize those who stand up and fight.
yeah, that's
To fight,
like
give them an alternate plan.
yeah, no, that is true, and it's I'm always marveled by the human apathy, as you mentioned, that if something is happening in your neighbor's house, aren't you concerned about it? Human apathy knows no bounds today because of the capitalist alienation we are suffering from, and I wonder how, as an Arab American diplomat and an academic, you are surviving in US, which is now on 20th of January waiting for the Donald Trump, who has chosen, Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Rubio, Huckabee, all of them who have been bought by the IPEC lobby.
Listen, I don't know. With Donald Trump, I mean, I've tried to ignore because I've always been a Democrat. I voted for Biden the first time, but before he decided to pull back from the race, I had decided not to vote for him and not to vote for Trump either. I decided for the first time in a lifetime of voting not to vote. And my liberal friends were disappointed. Oh no, you'd be giving your vote indirectly to Trump. I said, I don't care. Between Genocide Joe and the thief in chief, who was Trump when he was president, I cannot make a choice. And if you, it's partly my reaction to both of them and how they act, not just for Palestine, but for domestic issues in the U.S. as well. But if you take a look at my book, Bunker Diplomacy, it explains sort of my journey from a student in Lebanon to the U.S. to professor, etc. But I explain in opening chapters sort of what shaped my mind. And of course, I'm diplomatic and certain things I say indirectly, but I think you can get the idea of what influenced me as a young man. And I grew up as a Christian Lebanese in the Christian community, which sometimes had prejudices against Muslims, sometimes prejudices against Palestinians. From age 15 or 16, I became very pro-Palestinian. From the poetry of Khalil Gibran, and from the songs of Fairouz, if you're familiar with that famous Lebanese icon, when she sings about Jerusalem, I had never been to Jerusalem, but it makes your hair stand on end. I mean, it's so emotional. And she unifies the Lebanese. There's no Lebanese who is immune to her songs. Listen to her songs, you're influenced by them. So I felt from the beginning that Palestine is a shared problem. It's not just for the Palestinians. And that the neighbors and brothers and cousins of the Palestinians are responsible to do what they can to help the Palestinians. I always felt that. But as a professor and as a diplomat and all that, you use your mind, you try to put your emotions aside. But even analytically and purely logically and rationally, if you do not solve the Palestinian problem by giving the Palestinians their own independent state, you will never be rid of all the problems that are spilling over in the region, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, including Yemen, including Iran. It all starts with Palestine.
Yeah, it is. It is. In fact, when the Arab uprising started, most of the Western, obviously not yours, but most of the Western academics saw it as a singular event, like calling it a spring and so many other things. But even Arab uprising was not alienated from the Palestinian cause.
Right.
And
it doesn't go away.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. It will keep coming back. And that is something. And what really, I really respect you, sir, for being so honest. Because it is very difficult in the place you are right now.
Well, I mean, since I retired, when I worked for the government, I had to condition my speech so as not to oppose, not to offend. Internal meetings, I always opposed. But externally, when I spoke to the media, I had to remain within the lines. Although I never accepted, even as a spokesperson, I never accepted the talking points from Washington, because they were always what we call wooden language. They were always meaningless, irrelevant to what's really happening on the ground. And they still are. They are so ridiculous right now. When I look at former colleagues who are trying to defend the administration and explain what it's doing, I say, but are these people listening to themselves, or how can they explain to their children what they're doing?
There's one explanation that was very interesting, and by someone who was very pro this ethnic cleansing and genocide, saying it's not a genocide, specifically on the fact, I'm not able to get the numbers, Why it's not a genocide? Because look at the population in Gaza. In all the places where it has been a genocide, the population has declined. But in Gaza, it has increased 2x times. So it will be wrong to call it a genocide when the population is increasing. This was the explanation. And then the person counted all the countries where so-called
It is in,
genocide. Yeah.
it is inhuman. It is someone who does not, they dehumanize the Palestinians. It's like they're talking about cockroaches or rats or something.
Human
They don't,
animals.
yeah, they don't consider them, human beings worthy of respect and worthy of life.
Yeah.
And I have people I knew a long time ago here in Washington who are in think tanks that support Israel so much. And one of them, the Washington Institute, wrote a report at one point early on, I mean, 6, 7 months ago, when the numbers people were talking about, 30,000 dead or among the Palestinians. And they issued a long report about all these numbers are Hamas numbers and that the real number is nowhere near that and something. And so I answered an old, friend. And I said, so if 30,000 is too much, what would be acceptable to you? If 20,000, 10,000, 10,000 Palestinian lives, it's okay. And he said, "Oh, you don't care about the truth?" I said, "No, I have no problem with the truth. And if you get facts, that's fine. But if you think the truth is in the numbers of dead and wounded, then you are missing the real story. And perhaps you are deliberately missing the real story. What was happening from the very beginning is this government in Israel is extreme right wing, and they have these dreams and designs, and they want to depopulate the area.
Yes.
Beginning with northern Gaza, they want to settle it, then southern Gaza, and then they are moving slowly, gradually on the West Bank, village by village, city by city. That is the story. It's not a question of numbers. The numbers are horrifying, and you cannot imagine it. But don't argue with me about the numbers. Now we're 45,000 according to the UN and medical organizations. All right, so take off 20,000. Does that make a difference? I mean, you are still trying to kill off an entire population.
I mean, yeah, it's also the idea of the Greater Israel, which also has northern parts of Saudi Arabia into it.
I mean, these people are saying it. It's not that we are making it up.
Yeah.
You have to look at the Israeli media. You have to listen to Ben Gvir and Smotrich in Netanyahu's government and listen to what they're saying, and they'll tell you. They'll tell you what they want.
Ben Gvir, actually, 2 days back, 3 days back, the mother, I guess, of a hostage had a real, she was, and she has been, posting on social media for a long time. And whenever I put it on YouTube, somehow YouTube does the algorithm that if I post on Lebanon or if I post on Gaza or even the hostages, it doesn't, there's some algorithm behind it. It doesn't get that traction. Otherwise, other posts get like 1,000 views or many others. She had a fight. She had a massive altercation with Ben Gvir 2 days back about why the hostages are still not back.
They don't care about the hostages.
They don't care. They don't care. Biden, who's a self-declared Zionist, went and at least met the hostage families. Netanyahu has not. And
they could have had a deal to release the hostages the first month. This started October 7. By November, they could have had, of last year, they could have had a deal. But they did not want a deal. They wanted to finish off Hamas and depopulate Gaza. That's been the goal from the beginning.
Do you think that the reason for depopulating Gaza is the economic reason of having the Ben Gurion port or the tradeway route to function? The Ben Gurion port route to function, to use Gaza more as a special economic zone. Natural gas has been now, though natural gas was found near Gaza in 90s itself. But do you think that the entire idea of depopulating Gaza is more to make it as a economic zone?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, from the religious point of view, which is part of the problem, is that this is part of Palestine, and they want at least the entire Palestine. But secondly, in anticipation of coming back to the White House, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, went to Israel and told them that, hurry up and finish up, basically, so we can build golf courses and beach resorts for you in Gaza. Of course, it's an economic zone, but they need to get rid of the population first and make sure that nobody is resisting them there. Then they can invest money. I mean, it's a shoreline on the Mediterranean. It's a very strategic location. There's probably some oil to be excavated off the shore of Gaza. So yes, of course. I mean, that's the pragmatic side of them wanting it. But then, as I said, there's a religious side, and this is something that, when I say you have to go back to the origin of the problem, Israel, and people don't like to hear it here, and when I say it, I and others risk being called anti-Semites and all kinds of bad names. But the fact is that Israel is the last surviving Western colonial project. It's colonialism. I mean, all the other colonialisms, French and British and so on, collapsed. South Africa was South Africa, the whites took over in 1948, the same year that Israel was established. And the white people came from Holland and from the United Kingdom. And the apartheid state remained in force for 50 years until it was dismantled in the 90s due to building up pressure, civil society, populations rising in Europe and the US. Eventually, especially when the Soviet Union weakened and American support was withdrawn, there was going to be a big bloodbath. But eventually it changed and it became a democratic state. So apartheid was dismantled. What you have in Israel are Jews who came from mainly Western countries. There are Eastern Jews, certainly, who have a long history in the region. And those could get along fine with, they're virtually indistinguishable from the Arabs they lived amongst historically. But the Jews who came in from Germany and from Poland and Russia and other places are different. They're, the white European types. And they have dominated now for 76 years. Now, and they are mainly propelled by all-around support from the US and from most of Western Europe. So in the end of the day, if they really wish to get along, live and let live in the area, they have to follow the South Africa model. Of course, there are important differences. In South Africa, the whites were a tiny minority compared to the overall population, whereas Israel, Palestine, they're about equal in numbers. And secondly, the whites in South Africa didn't have the religious motivation that Zionism has. There are many secular Zionists, but they've used the religion. God gave you this land, and you can quote from the Old Testament and from the Torah. And that zeal, religious zeal, drives the settlers on the West Bank, certainly.
Yeah.
And that's very hard. That makes Israel a tougher problem than South Africa,
Yes.
frankly.
Yes.
But eventually, it is colonialism that has to give way to, being a normal state. Nobody is saying, disappear overnight. Nobody is saying go jump in the sea. But they need to be, if they want to be treated as a normal state, they have to behave like a normal state in the region in which they're in.
My first, like as you were speaking, sir, the first question I was like, how can others treat you as anti-Semite when you yourself are a Semite? It's something, how can they treat you as an anti-Semite? They don't understand.
That's a misnomer. I mean, the Arabs are Semites.
Yeah,
Certainly the Arabs of the Levant.
yeah,
So there is no difference in the origin between the Lebanese Palestinians and the Jews, the Sephardic Jews, the Eastern Jews. They're all Semites.
yeah. I,
I mean, I'm of Semitic origin. I'm a Semite.
exactly.
Yeah.
So how can you be
So, but
anti-Semite?
but they would still accuse me of that because it's like when you curse somebody, it doesn't matter. You call them whatever,
Yeah,
expletive deleted. Doesn't matter that they're not that, but that tarnishes them once you curse them like that.
yeah.
Anti-Semitism is it tarnishes people. They don't want to be called anti-Semites.
Yeah, and the point is that I was watching a documentary of 1940s US when Roosevelt didn't want to take US into the war. They said that it's all a European war. Jews were, the British, the Jews, and others wanted a war in which US gets propelled. But it's interesting that how Truman, because of Eddie Jacobson, changed his stand, recognized Israel, and things changed.
You have to, I mean, in his memoirs, there's a couple of books, one written by somebody else but about him, and the story of how he was influenced on that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's, an old friend of his who was a rabbi came over to see him and he started, pleading and they
yeah,
both started crying and all that. He moved him emotionally on that issue when rationally he was not sure which way
yeah.
to go.
In fact, he was very anti-Zionist. In
But no, I mean, it was, there was early on, you go back to World War One, when the British Balfour Declaration promised to establish a national homeland
yeah,
for the Jews in Palestine. President Wilson sent a team to Palestine to investigate. And they came back with recommendations. They said there's a real population there and they're not going to be happy. This is going to lead to problems. You're
yeah,
not
yeah,
colonizing, an empty piece of land.
yeah.
Uh, and Wilson was against it. But, politics and emotion and religion. Look,
And money.
today, and money,
Yeah, yeah.
today, the Christian evangelists here in the U.S. are more Zionists than the Zionists.
Yeah, that is another, the Christian evangel, like Huckabee talking about it. There's no West Bank, there's no Palestinian, it's Judea, Samaria. I'm like,
Just appointing this man for Israel tells you what Trump has in mind, and it's not a good story.
it's
It's
not,
not
it's
a good
actually a
story. So
scary
that's why,
story.
when you circle back and you talk about the ceasefire, which is always good, stop bombing is always good, you know. But in the end of the day, the problem is not on its way to being resolved. It just gets more and more complicated, and I'm afraid that with Trump, Biden actively supported genocide. Trump doesn't like war. I think he genuinely does not like war, but that's why he's telling Netanyahu to hurry up and get it over with, so that when he takes office January 20th, he can focus on building golf courses and beach clubs.
Immigrants.
Immigrate. Oh yeah, the
Yeah,
domestic issue.
yeah.
Yes. But with the focus of the Trump administration, and I wrote a long article about his expected foreign policy for the Middle East. He's going to focus on expanding the Abraham Accords, the normalization. Already they have UAE and Bahrain Of course, Egypt
Morocco.
and Jordan have an older thing. They're going to focus on Saudi Arabia, try to convince MBS to join. But as I say, these normalization efforts are government to government. They're not genuine people to people normalization.
Yeah.
And secondly, they have absolutely nothing to do with Palestine.
Yeah, and none of these countries ever had a feud with Israel. They never fought Israel. They have had tacit alliances with Israel all the while. Though even though diplomatically, yes.
And I don't know. I mean, theoretically and on paper, one has to say there is an opportunity for a new day, for a new policy. I mean, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been dialoguing with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
China midwife that detente between them. They could agree on something that would be positive. But the trick would be to influence the Israeli government, which seems to be getting harder and harder to do. And at some point, it'll be too late. There will be nothing left to save. It's also important to influence the Trump administration, to try to talk some sense into the Trump administration. So Saudi Arabia, the UAE, he has a lot of commercial interests. He sees dollar signs whenever he looks at those two countries. So fine, if they have any sense of responsibility for Palestinians and for peace in the region, they will try to influence Trump correctly. But, I wouldn't, I would say theoretically, it's possible to start a new positive chapter in the region, but the chances of that happening are very slim.
So you're very hopeful when you think that anyone can influence Trump.
I'm not hopeful at all.
Yeah, it's going to be,
I would not try it myself.
Yeah, it's like for the diplomat, for the lobby group which will try to influence him, they would rather need to, get a relaxation of weeks and months and years after the conversation. So that is right now there. So, sir, we have already taken more than, our time. And I didn't realize, it is already 1 hour. So thank you so much, sir, for the privilege of your time and for taking out time for us.
Well,
and
thank you.
Your book.
It gave us an opportunity to have a tour d'horizon, as the French would say. We toured the horizon.
Yes.
We looked at the big picture and the small picture, and I think it's very important to connect the two.
Yes, it is indeed. Thank you so much. Shukran, Habibi.
I enjoyed